All right, I would like to discuss demand and supply with you. I want to talk about the example I posted in Blackboard. This was the monthly market, or the market for potatoes. If you look at that article, you'll see that there's millions of pounds of potatoes kept in cold storage every year. It's basically farmers grow them, harvest them, and store them, and they can release them throughout the year as customers want them. Majority of those potatoes are turned into French fries and sold in restaurants around the world. Basically, it's a huge export market. I think 90% of the potatoes are sent to the French fry market. All right, so if you look at this hypothetical market here, let's say that there's we're talking about tons a month that are sold. So maybe if you look at this equilibrium, there's 800 sold tons sold at a price of $60. Okay, and this is the equilibrium price, 60, and then the quantity is 800. Now, if you notice, the supply curve is upward sloping, and that is just because as the price goes higher, farmers or suppliers want to release more potatoes. So they're going to try to sell more if the price is higher. That's their signal to sell more. They want to get that price. Now, if you look at the demand curve, that slopes down, and it's the opposite effect. So as the price lowers, customers are going to demand more. So that's their incentive. They want to respond to that lowering price. So those two things together give us this equilibrium here at point A. Okay, and so, all right, so if we have P0 and Q0, those are our initial starting points. Okay, so looking at this again, we have our point A there and our initial price and quantity. Now, what's happening is because all these hotels and restaurants have closed, have really decreased customers, they've canceled their orders for potatoes. So this demand curve then, that's something that causes it to really decrease. The demand curve shifts back. All right, so if we see that blue arrow there, that represents the shift back. So then our new line is the new downward sloping curve. And so that's our second demand curve. And with that, we're going to get a new equilibrium price and quantity. And that's point B. So our price now is a little bit over 40, and the quantity is a little over 400. All right. Okay, so you see that there. So I'd say 42, and then maybe 405 is the quantity. So if you look at this, so we talked about a demand shifting back because people are not ordering the potatoes for their restaurants. Now, there's other things that can change the demand for a product. Maybe your income when the market's income adjusts, that could cause things to go up or down. So let's say income goes down, people might actually demand something more like potatoes instead of bread, for example. They'll go for the cheaper thing. We call that an inferior good. Now, the opposite could be true too. If the price of something goes up, you might buy more of something fancy like steaks or something. That's one example often used. Another thing that can cause demand to change is population. So as tons of people have moved into LA over many years, that's caused a big demand for homes. So that really increases the price for homes because of that population change. Now, the other thing that can happen is taste change. So if, for example, if people realize there's health benefits from pecans, then they're going to demand more of them. That's another shift of the demand curve. That would be a shift out of the demand curve. All right. So if you look back at this example, again, we have our new equilibriums here. So we have 40 for the price and about 405 for the quantity. But another point here is that nothing has happened to the supply. The supply curve is exactly the same. So therefore, we're just looking at a change along the supply curve. We're moving along the supply curve. There's no change to the supply curve itself. Okay? That's really important. So farmers still have their potatoes locked away in their cold storage. Now, it is possible that the supply curve could change. So if you look at that article, there were a couple of examples of farmers having to decide if they were going to continue to plant potatoes for this next season, or even dig up some potatoes that they already had. Now, why would they do that? Well, if the demand is so low, they may say, well, I'm going to respond to that lower demand and just not plant potatoes, plant something else like corn to feed livestock. All right, so if that happens and a lot of farmers start doing that, then yes, the supply curve can actually shift back. So here's our new supply curve now. So we call that S1. And if you see that it's actually moving along our second demand curve here, so going from B up to C, that would be our new location here. And so I give it a new price and a new quantity. All right, so in this case, the price becomes 70 and the quantity is 195. So actually the price went up because in this case, the supply shifted back. There's fewer available for supply. So now we're at that higher price. Now, this is another example. So it's the same example, but another case, maybe not that many farmers react and they don't really decrease their amount grown. So in that case, the supply curve would not shift back as far. So if you see in this case, our new price and quantity is around 50 and the quantity is 350. So we're not looking at as big of drops as the previous one. But really, for this market for potatoes, so far, I wouldn't say that the supply curve has really shifted back. This is just hypothetical going forward. Depends on how the farmers, what the farmers decide to do. My guess is that probably, yes, the supply curve will shift back. But so far, all we have is just that movement along the curve. Okay. One more thing, why else would supply change? Well, just like demand, there's other things that can trigger supply changing. If the number of suppliers changes, on this, like with potatoes, if the number of farmers growing potatoes decreases, then yes, that will cause a shift. But farmers can enter too to that market, and that might shift the supply higher. That would be a downward pressure on the price. Now, technology could change too. More efficient technology may allow supply to increase. That would be a shift out. We've seen that a lot with agriculture as tractors have gotten more efficient, as people gained economies of scale. That really has pushed the supply curve out. Related, cost of inputs. As the cost of labor, water, or other inputs go up, there could be a change, a shift in the supply curve too. In that case, if costs are going up, the supply curve would shift back or decrease the supply. But if things were getting cheaper, then the supply curve could shift out. So I hope this it clears up some things. I would ask you to go through this a couple times, read the article, and try to really understand these points. I think it'll help you out a lot going forward.